Sam, welcome back to Austin, Texas.
Thank you.
I didn't really get a chance to visit with you too much last time you were in. I think I was busy trying to help support the conference, the DCAC conference. But for those of our listeners that are either dialing in or listening on a podcast or watching on YouTube, why don't you introduce yourself to these people and let them know who you are?
Definitely. So Sam Huckaby, I work for Vantage Data Centers, actually from a data center specific company. It's the first I ever worked for. Had a little bit of history dabbling in data centers. First one actually being back in Nashville, and it was for, I actually worked for a concrete contractor, and we were doing the concrete structure for the data center. And it was, back then people didn't necessarily know like what a data center was.
Sure.
It was for a bank. And so it was, just kind of, we were like, this building is built like it was just stout. And so it was like extremely overbuilt, and we didn't necessarily understand. We were just concrete guys. So, it's been, so coming on to Vantage and kind of diving in fully into the data center world has been pretty interesting for me. And to kind of see the way the industry has unfolded even over the past 4 years to where it was at when I got into it to where it's at today it's we all know we've seen this like vertical climb of demand and
Sure.
and need and so how do you continue to adapt and be agile through that process has been it's been a lot of fun. I mean, even during that course of time, I started at Vantage as a director leading up one of our California campuses, and now I'm a senior VP leading our North America team, which has just been very humbling, but also just a lot of fun. And so how do you, I'm sure like anybody else is thinking, how do you scale that? How do you continue to keep the growth and keep up with the demand, but also keeping quality and value to our customers and to our investors and also to our partners who we know we can't do our business without them.
Sure.
So
that's exciting. I definitely want to go back to that part of the story with how and when you got to Vantage, but I also think that some of the people listening would find a lot of value taking it as far back as we could go. So are you from Tennessee originally?
So born in Arkansas.
Oof.
My family moved around a lot.
What part of Arkansas?
Northwest.
Okay.
So hometown of Walmart.
Okay.
So Northwest Arkansas actually is gorgeous. It's the Ozarks, beautiful place, and has changed obviously very significantly. A lot of Walmart money. There's some great museums now there, and it's just a completely different place. But I went to high school and college out in Tennessee. So high school outside of Chattanooga, and then spent a couple of years at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and then I wrapped up at Middle Tennessee State. And Middle Tennessee State has a program called Concrete Industry Management, which I had never heard of. Most people give me that.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Never heard of it. And it was actually started, and it's one of the reasons I love it. It was started by the industry. And they basically went to the university and says, hey, we need people who can come out of college understanding concrete and the concrete industry. And if you think about any of our structures, any of our buildings, every building, your house, everything has concrete. Everything, right? And it might be a little bit, might be a lot, depending on how your structure is. And so the thing that actually sold me was they were like, yeah, there's 100% job placement.
Yeah.
And I was like, sold. And growing up relatively poor, it was like, I went to college, not for the experience. I went to the college to get a job. Like that was my sole, like I just wanted to be able to get a job. And so they also did a lot of internships. I worked for like a geotechnical company doing concrete testing, got ACI certified for concrete testing and all that stuff. And so did that in the summertime, and then worked for Charter Construction out of Nashville doing concrete work. And so I did that during the day and then took my classes at night. And I got my undergrad in concrete industry management with a minor in business. Was kind of ready to get out of Tennessee and move to California.
Let me ask you, like, you went to what made you move to Chattanooga? Your parents' job, career shift, or what industry were they in?
So, my parents, we moved around a lot. I went to like 18 different schools. As a kid. And so I have 5 older brothers, so a relatively big family. There's a pretty good gap. So it was kind of like a period of time, and I'm the baby. There's 6 boys, and there's a good gap between the older 3 and the younger 3. And so we moved out from, born in Arkansas, moved around a little bit then, and then we moved out to California. And then when we moved from California to Tennessee, my 3 older brothers stayed in California.
What part?
In Fallbrook. So
Is that
like
north or south? Or?
It's between San Diego and LA.
Okay, Fallbrook, like in Orange County then, or?
Yeah, it's south of Orange County.
Okay.
Yeah, and from the coast, so not far from like Oceanside.
Okay.
And so, but we moved out, and that's when I kind of started school, did kindergarten then out in Tennessee, and then we moved around a lot even then, like Missouri and Arkansas, then back to Tennessee, and did a really short stint in Georgia, and moved around. So my dad kind of had 2 major careers. One was building custom homes. In the 80s, as everybody knows, that market, the whole housing market just went to hell.
Sure.
And then he went to go start driving a truck. So the majority of my life, up until I was 16, he was driving a truck. At 16 in Chattanooga, he stopped driving a truck and he started doing, small construction projects. Well, that's when I started working.
So when you went to college then, did you think, hey, I'm going to get in the family business and I'm going to get into construction?
It was, I kind of always wanted to do commercial construction. So I wasn't a big fan of residential.
Okay.
I wanted to be on bigger projects and go off and do.
Why was that?
Things. I don't know. I think it was more because they're longer, bigger teams.
Bigger value of a program, being
Yep.
part of something bigger. Gotcha. Yep. So when you were going to college originally, you spent, you went to Chattanooga State first, or that's where you finished?
Yeah, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. I went there for 2 years, kind of just did all my general
Sure.
ed stuff, and then and then it was like, okay, I got to figure out what I want to do. There was really nothing in construction at UTC, and so looking around, it's like, well, Middle Tennessee has this program they actually have a construction management program, but it was about residential, and so I met with that group, and then I also met with the CIM, the Concrete Industry Management Program.
Interesting.
And it was like 100% job placement, sold, let's go do that.
So when they tell you those things, they tell you what the disparity is between what the person with the construction management degree gets versus the concrete person, or was there any?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the program for the construction management just wasn't as big of a program at that school at the time. So
you didn't have a declared major when you were at UTC? It wasn't until you transferred to...
I actually did. It was industrial engineering. And I had a professor talk to me about how he was ecstatic about designing a handle on a toilet. And at that point in time, I was realizing that I was in the wrong...
Didn't want to be an engineer. Didn't want to be building toilets. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can understand.
I kind of realized, I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. I need something more hands-on.
So you transferred, how far is that? I mean, is that another side of the state?
So Chattanooga's south by Georgia, and then, Nashville center. At Chattanooga's kind of center, you just head up, I think it's 2.5 hours or so.
North of Nashville.
No, so for Chattanooga and then 2.5 hours. So Memphis, or not Memphis, but Murfreesboro is like 40 minutes south of Nashville.
Gotcha. So you transfer there and you decide like, hey man, I'm gonna dig in deep on this on this concrete thing. And then with that, like, how did you get to the point where, like, what do you do when you graduate with, concrete degree?
So I was really lucky. I had I got an internship at a geotechnical company where I was going around testing concrete. And that was my first time onto like a commercial job site, kind of really getting into it and stuff. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And I kind of learned the first thing about, which I think is what I try to do, which is to treat everybody the same and treat them well. And so there was a guy that I worked with who was kind of really well known in the Nashville area. But his whole career was around testing concrete, doing rebar inspections, that type of stuff. It was kind of his bread and butter. Well, he was a single dad. And so, but when you're and you're on these massive jobs and you're a big concrete guy, what you end up, having to do is you got to do a pour at 2 a.m. And then you got to be there all day to continue with inspections, or they're starting to pour at midnight. And so they had some big concrete pour going on, and he said, hey, can you come out and support me? I said, yeah. So I went out and supported him, and then he was talking, we just ended up talking. And I told him, I said, hey, listen, like, I know you got to pick up your kids, or you got to do this or do that. don't even bother calling dispatch. Just call me up and I'll come do your I was young, right? I was 20. I was like, I'll come and do your midnight pours. Not a big deal. Like, I don't have a family to go home to,
yeah.
so don't worry about it. I'll make it happen for you. And I did a good job, did what he needed to do, and then he could also then take care of his family, but also take care of his kids, bring them to school, whatever.
Yeah, you were a hero. Yeah.
Well, and then I got an opportunity through some mutual friends through Charter Construction, which is a
Charter or Charger?
Charter.
Okay.
They're out of Nashville. They're a concrete.
Are they national or are they focused?
They're focused. Anyway, I go in and do an interview. I actually knew so the owners. I knew one of the daughters of the owners, and I walk in and Turner Talley, who's the president there now, he goes, I appreciate that you know her, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me.
Sure.
And then I mentioned Paul, who's the guy that I worked with over at that geotech company, and he goes, and that kind of just changed everything.
Because you had validation, that was the credibility.
Yeah, because everybody in the concrete world knew Paul in Nashville because he was top-notch inspector, right? Reasonable, fair, that whole bit. And so they called Paul, and that got me the internship and then the job with Charter Construction.
So did you go to work there when you graduated college?
Right, actually, while I was still doing.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I kind of switched, and so I did the geotech for a summer, and then when school started, I went to go work for them, and then they were awesome. They let me work around school, because again, for me, college was about getting a job.
Sure.
And so to be able to do that application of working in construction while also learning about it at school was like.
Were you going to school during the day or working during the day and going to school at night?
It was a bit of a mix of both. So like I would do school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If I couldn't get my classes that I needed at night, it was on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then I'd work Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. But there was the old Motorola, two-way cell phones and all that fun stuff. So I was,
So working all the time.
In between classes, I was working, however I needed to do to make sure our project kept on moving forward.
Were you working, as a student, were you technically full-time or?
Yeah, I was full-time. I was doing 20, I had no life other than working in school.
Okay, so did you have a girlfriend at that time or just working?
Yeah, I had an ex-wife at the time.
Oh, gotcha. All right, I gotcha. Now we're getting to know each other.
Yeah. So it was one of the reasons I moved up to Nashville, got married, moved up to Nashville. She wanted to go do occupational therapy, and then things didn't work out.
Did she go to school with you at first?
She went to a different school, in Tennessee, up in Nashville. So she found a school that worked, and I found a school that worked. We got married, moved up there, and then about a year and a half later.
Did you know that person from like high school or something?
Yeah, we knew each other. Prom king and queen in high school.
Ooh,
yeah.
That's what I always wondered what happens to those people.
Yeah, they get divorced.
Nice. I'm not sure all of them do, but all right. So you go to school and you're kind of playing grown up because you're married.
Yeah.
You're still in college, working full time, but also studying full time. And you got lucky to find a place that had some credibility and a guy that you were just a good soldier behind validated you, which helped block and tackle and get you in. Do you still talk to that person or you keep in touch?
No.
Is he still in the game, you think?
I don't know. It's been a while.
Well, would that have been like one of your first mentors in the industry?
It was more about, I wouldn't necessarily say he was my first mentor. I would probably say it was more because he was on his job site, I was on mine. I would go and just help and support him, and that was good enough for me because it kind of goes back to he's a person, he's trying to take care of his family, he's trying to do the right thing, and I have an opportunity to help him out. And then he was like, hey, if you ever needed, a reference, and I mentioned to him, hey, I'm going to interview with Charter, and he goes, well, let them know.
Oh, I got you.
And so there wasn't necessarily, a big mentorship there. I would say that my first mentorship was actually working at Charter, so awesome company, like Turner Talley, like just awesome individual, like even walked with me in life going through my divorce, which was rough, while still working full time, still going to school full time. I would say he was, like when I look back and I look at the list of people who actually have a list of people who've like made major impacts in my life, he's one of them.
Oh, that's cool.
Now, I don't necessarily I think guys are probably a bit different.
We're awesome like that.
but I feel like I could probably pick up
Exactly.
with him just like that. No
You called him
problem.
today, it'd be time to have a beer, no harm, no foul, right?
Yep.
That's the best part about us. No long goodbyes. I do like that. I have a bunch of guys that I've served with in the military that every now and then, if I pop into them, we pick right back up where we left off. So when you were going to school, did you have any like unusual ambition and you're like, look, I'm going to be in construction. I want to one day own my own construction company in concrete, or you just were like, I just need to have a job?
Yeah. I mean, because when you grow up in trailer parks and hotels and stuff, I was like, I just need
Stability.
I just gotta take care of myself and earn a paycheck and,
I got you.
and do well for my family.
Now, did you have all your older brothers? I guess you have 5 older brothers. Did any of them fall into construction as well?
So one of them did. He, Joe, the one right above me, he actually owns his own construction company in the Denver area doing residential siding repair, bathroom remodels, that type of stuff.
Do you see him all the time now? Or?
Yeah. So we actually, when we moved to Denver a year ago, we moved a half a mile from his place.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And he's the next older one. So you guys are how much?
2 years. 2 years between us.
I got you. And did he want to study that? And okay,
he actually went to school for music and then got to music theory, and it kicked his
a little confusing.
Yeah, it kicked his tail, and so he dropped out, didn't finish, but he went to work for Apple for a long time, working in their stores, became a manager, and then kind of worked his way up in the Apple world, and then was like, I need to do something different, and then started up his own.
Good for him.
He worked with me and my dad when we did, because I worked with my dad for 3-4 years doing.
Like when?
So at high school, during high school, and then during my first 2 years of college when I was in Chattanooga.
What were you doing with him? What were you guys building? Residential?
Decks, sheds, re-roofs.
Those are perfect. I mean, like having that skill set for your own personal advantage.
Yeah, I built a little ADU. It's additional dwelling units, what they call them in California, in my backyard out in Livermore when I was there. And so I built it myself.
So that there was a lot of advantages. That now when you do that in California, do they make you get like a permit of some kind?
Yeah, I did the drawings, got permits.
They didn't make it. Did you have to have like a GC license or anything?
No, because it was my own personal property, luckily.
How cool is that? All right. So you graduate college, you end up getting a job before you graduate, and how long did you stay at Charter?
I actually, when I graduated is when I was like, I got to get out of it. Going through a divorce and stuff, I kind of feel like I needed to. All my family had left Tennessee at that time.
They all had. So you were the last one in Tennessee. Now, how old were you?
I would have been 21, 22.
So 21, 22, graduating school and saying, I'm done, and now I'm going to move to California?
I got it. So got a job out in California. I hated the job.
Where at in California?
It was in Livermore.
So the first place you made it to after Tennessee is Livermore.
Yep.
And what made you pick that spot?
So again, 100% job placement coming out of the program. So what they did, and I suspect they still do it, is that they actually did like job fairs, or they would have some of the larger like Cemex and some of these larger companies come in and they do dinners. And they actually talk about their company, and then you get students get to mingle with recruiters and the people who are working with the company, and you can get, and so you kind of work your way through that.
Like a little mini hiring conference type of thing?
Yeah, and they kind of really tried to do it up nice with a good dinner, and because they were looking for people for students like who understood, because part of the thing to get out of that program is you had to have your ACI certification for concrete testing. And
what's ACI certification?
American Concrete Institute.
Okay.
So it's like if you want to like do a slump test and make cylinders and all that stuff, you have to be certified to do that.
Okay.
And so you had to, which is uncommon in any universities to be able to walk out having a certification. So you actually had to have, so they did labs. We actually practically had to learn that stuff, which was just odd. Like that kind of goes back to really connected with me, hands-on, building with my dad, understanding construction, as much as you can from a residential perspective, and, understanding what materials are and that type of stuff. And so me being able to apply that within my college, like it just made sense to me. It made it easier. But then I also really enjoy the theory part, like my business courses and that type of stuff was also a lot of fun. But so then I did some interviews, got a job to move out to California. 4 of my brothers lived in California at the time, moved out, and it was an inside sales job for a precast company, and I hated it.
So you were out because you understood it as an SME and you were certified. They're like, you could probably go sell solutions and because everything's custom, right?
Yeah, well, so precast would be more like manholes and
Gotcha.
that all that DI, so drain inlet boxes, all the stuff that goes underground was this company. That's what they fabricated and built. And so it was like taking a set of, that's where I learned how to reach civil drawing. So I learned how to do AutoCAD and understand structural drawings from when I worked at Charter because I did all the shop drawings as a project manager working for them and took that skill set. And then I learned how to do civil design or read civil plans, understand what inverts meant and,
what was the name of that company?
Central Precast. They're actually not in business anymore. They got bought out. They were
seems like a great time to be in business if that's your product right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they were laying down and pouring in Livermore. Is that?
Yeah. So they had a plant in, so all their stuff was precast, right? So they had a plant in Pleasanton, and then their main headquarters and sales office. So they had a plant in Pleasanton, Lathrop, and then one down south of San Jose. And I can't remember the name.
Was it just to service Northern California?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they were owned by a massive company called U.S. Concrete. They were like one of their offshoots.
Okay.
Of U.S. Concrete.
Interesting. We're gonna keep pulling back until we figure out like when was your first introduction to a data center, what that was. But
so my first introduction to a data center was back in Nashville, and it was working for Charter, and we were doing the concrete structure for a bank under a GC. And that's where I remember the first time ever coming up for a data center ever was then. And again, we were just doing the concrete, didn't know anything better, didn't know what it meant, didn't know about redundancies or even really what was going inside of it. We just knew this was a bank data center and that was it.
So a bank data center in Tennessee, I'm trying to think who that was. And what year, you were 21 or 22 around this time. How old are you now?
I'm 38.
All right. So we could probably try to, so when you were doing that, what made it so much different from pouring concrete from it being a data center versus a commercial warehouse or something else?
Oh, the size of the structure was just, because it being bank, they wanted it to be
tier 4.
Yeah. But the structure needed to withhold like XYZ class of like a class 4 hurricane, tornado. And so the size of the structure was just like
over the top.
It was just insane. Like all of us were like, this thing's never coming down.
Plus,
ever.
Dang. So that was your first data center. Were you there when you were watching it, like when you saw the heart and soul get put into it too?
No. So because when the structure was done, we were done.
Yeah.
And the reason I got to be a part of that job was one of the tasks that Charter gave me was to run their finishing crew. And so I kind of got an opportunity to see a bunch of different jobs across
I got you.
Nashville.
Exposure.
And so it was like, hey, we got to get, we were starting to pour decks or whatever it is, and would step in and help. I'll tell you, one of the greatest things about Charter, and I highly recommend of any company, they had you spend 3 to 6 months in the field with a foreman or superintendent before they allowed you in the office.
So funny story, Jesse from our team, right? Mm-hmm. So Jesse's uncle worked for me, and it was a Vantage Data Center project years ago. We were at Nova and we were the GC. And I had a strong team on that program already. And Jesse's uncle would try to convince me to hire or interview Jesse for months. But at the time, Nova had a lot of family. They're like a lot of second, third generation people. And I was trying to stop hiring family. Does that make sense? I was like, hey, I think we've done the family gig for a while. Let's see what happens when we bring on as many people as we can from the outside. But I remember it was like 3 or 4 months into it, and finally Doug's like, hey, not for nothing, but he's like a war hero. He's got all these medals and been in a lot of this and that. And as a professional courtesy, I'm like, I probably don't need him, but I'll be happy to interview him and then maybe make a phone call to a couple groups. You know how this works.
Yeah.
And I missed the first interview with Jesse. It was a conference we were at, and bad things happen, right? And then same thing, don't you judge me. So the same thing happened on the second one. And it was the same, like I always tell people the story. I'm like, I got Tinoco'd, right? That, what that means, right? So that means you're probably going to have a hard time making your flight the next morning or a phone call. And this one was him. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, if it was anybody else, I'd kill it. But he's a veteran, and I've already did this once to him, so I'm going to get him on the phone. And I remember talking to him just blindly, like going through it all and trying to listen to his story. And at the end, he was like, "Hey, not for nothing." And I had no intention of hiring him, but he goes, "Not for nothing. If you give me this opportunity, I'll work everybody you got." And I was like, "We'll see," right? Because there's some hardworking cats that we had on our team. We had just had some grinders. So I remember calling up Mike Maldari, who runs, he's like your counterpart at 1547, I guess now. But I remember calling Mike, and he ran the field. And I said, "Hey, I think I got another superintendent. I know we don't need one, but we're going to move him. Not move him, like his family's still in Ohio. But I'm like, he gets to fly home once a month, and he's not allowed in the construction trailer for like 3 to 6 months." And basically we started almost like creating these qual cards to where the superintendents of all the trades, once they all said, okay, he understands this language enough, then he's allowed in the trailer. So it was months before he was allowed to sit in the trailer. But I'm a big fan of that model where immersion is the only way to learn.
Yeah. So there was another guy that was going through it at the same time I was. He didn't make it.
Ooh, didn't like the field, huh?
Yeah. He wanted to be in the office. And
Where's the air conditioning? Yep.
Yep. And it was like, so I was out in the middle of winter in Nashville laying concrete. But again, I one of the benefits is you kind of as I look back at my life, one of the benefits is like I wasn't afraid of that because I had built with my dad, for 4 years before that, starting at 16, and didn't matter if it was cold outside, you're getting up and you're going to be building that fence, that deck, that building, that re-roofing that house, whatever it was. Like
they wake up and they put it in, man.
Yeah,
they
just got to go do it. So going and doing this, and I hadn't finished my degree or anything, but going and doing it for, hey, it's part of it. Let's go. And, the superintendent, awesome guy, just, was willing to take me under his wing. And I was able to help him out on the office side, right? To help paperwork, that type of thing, kind of things that he wasn't necessarily the best at. And so had a bit of a good relationship. He showed me what it meant to finish concrete and lay concrete and the whole intent behind it was for me to learn. Because if I was going to manage, if you will, and more of like a project management, like help make sure I'm not overloading them with too many projects, make sure we get good quality, I needed to understand what it meant. Like how many people does it take to actually lay that kind of concrete in that location? How many edges does it have? That type of stuff. And so the only way you're really going to learn that is to be out there and be in it and say, hey, you know what? That has a lot of handwork. That's going to take more workers than maybe this big open job where it's only perimeter and there's not a whole lot of handwork on it. And so you get to learn those practical things that ends up making you a better manager, project manager, be able to say, okay, well, let me help resource load this with the superintendent to make sure that we were able to cover those projects. But hands down, one of the best experiences I've ever had.
Because it sounds like during that phase, regardless, I mean, if you started on the SME side or the expert side and accredited side with certifications and stuff, but now you're learning the art of being a PM, right? And there's a lot more that goes to that, right? You don't have to know it all about something. You just had to know who knew it all about something, and then you had to figure out how to kind of coordinate, right? So that's you're in your early 20s, you moved to Pleasanton or Livermore, and you took a job working for a group, and you were the sales engineer.
Yeah, inside sales guy. And it was basically you waiting for a phone call from some, civil contractor saying, hey, here's a set of plans. I need you to take them off and give me a quote for how much it's going to cost for all of these manholes.
And what part didn't you like about it? Not a challenge?
Yeah. Well, and also I wanted to be out like seeing things get built. And this was literally, you were just picking up the phone. Okay, let me do this takeoff and then let me just send it off. It wasn't engaging enough for me with people.
How long were you there for?
Like 3-4 months.
Okay. And then what did you do from that point?
So then all of my brothers kind of have different backgrounds. And so one of them was a professor at the time. He now is a VP at a university, but professor at the time teaching communications. Well, they had the MBA program, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go get my MBA. It was up in Oregon, up outside of
Loyola?
No, it's George Fox University.
Okay.
And so applied for the program, got into the MBA program, and then, applied for some jobs and got some jobs. Ended up working for a general contractor called Inline Commercial Construction, and they did a lot of medical work at Providence Medical Centers. And so got to step in, and they were wanting to do more ground up work. And since I had a concrete and, kind of the beginnings of job, civil kind of experience, that's why they brought me on board, was to help. But, part of it was like, well, you also need to learn what it means to do a TI, a tenant improvement at a hospital or whatever it was. So that's kind of where I got into some of the same, the beginnings of more complicated builds and understanding MEP systems and that type of
Doing
thing.
hospitals. I started in hospitals too. That makes sense. Well, you were up in Oregon now at this point?
Yeah.
What part of Oregon is that?
Portland.
Okay, so you're in Portland. You went from Livermore, Northern California, to Oregon. And you had a brother that was up there, a professor at the university?
Yep.
So, and then you got into their MBA program, and you're doing that while working full time?
Yep.
And and the company was a traditional GC then? They were doing it all?
Family owned.
Self-performed?
Yeah. So they started out as a drywall company.
Oh, wow.
And then, kind of got more into the TI, saying, hey, we can manage more of this. And so got more into the TI world. And so while I was in California for that 3 to 4 months, I met my wife, who,
Okay.
And so
Is that where she's from?
she is, yeah, she's from Pleasanton. And so did a lot of, so we ended up continuing to date, and then ended up getting engaged. And then
How long was that MBA program? 1 year?
it was 18 months. It was like an executive. So all the stuff was at night. I actually ended up not finishing it because and the reason being is that got married and I wanted to focus on my marriage, kind of learn from the first go around.
Oh, I got you. I got you.
And so I actually put that on hold. And then we got married and then got a couple of job offers to move back to the Bay Area. And we kind of always talked about getting back down to the Bay Area. And since I put my MBA on hold, there was kind of 2 reasons I stopped. I had a heart procedure. So I've had like 3 heart procedures. And so that was my second one. And it was like, maybe I probably should slow down a little bit. And focus on my marriage, focus on my career, enjoyed the construction, enjoyed what I was doing. So we ended up getting a couple job offers to move back down to the Bay Area. And it was like, well, my wife's from there, so she was good.
Yeah.
While I was there, I made a lot of friends there, a lot of people I still keep in contact with today. And so we ended up moving back down to.
Did you have a job lined up when you moved, or you just knew if you got there, you'd get one?
No, I had a job lined up before I moved.
With a GC? Another GC?
It was with actually a developer, but they perform their own construction. So they kind of were like a developer / GC.
What were they developing?
Mainly office buildings and stuff.
Okay.
Another family-owned company that didn't necessarily, I didn't fit their culture.
Sure.
They were family in a different, you were kind of mentioning that in a bit, family in a bit of a different way.
I get it.
Wasn't my fit. And then ended up working for an owner's rep. And
Which one?
O'Connor Construction Management.
Are they still around? They get absorbed by somebody?
No, they're still around. They're actually moving pretty nationwide, but not in the data center world. They do more of like educate, like higher ed. Did a lot of bond programs with middle schools, elementary, like local school districts and stuff. So I did. That's where I kind of got into the world of the university and did stuff at San Jose State, working for O'Connor, doing their student union projects, student health counseling, and kind of
like building the whole buildings and stuff like that?
Doing all. Okay. And that was kind of when I was up at with Inline, I actually worked on one of their first ground ups, and it was for Providence Medical Centers, and it was a medical office building. Okay. And it was to step in and kind of to be the project engineer on that job with a good superintendent. And
how when we're done, I want to tie it together and how you got to think about this type of question. Like when we're done, once you start explaining that background, and then how you've had a pretty solid, successful career in data centers in the amount of time you've been in it as well. It sounds like you said it was fairly short. Would you hire you? Like looking back? Because like right now, but what was it, right? So like that's where we want to get to as well, is like I always we have an owner's rep group on the side that we do when we're not doing DCAC, and there are all these requirements that we get from people all the time that have like an X amount of requirements that they'd like to see in the people they hire. And when I ever sit down with these people, I'm like, hey man, remember your first data center program? Like, were you and they're like, listen man, I didn't really know much about data centers when I got into it. Does that make sense? But
yeah. So kind of to kind of focus on the data center world a little bit. So through my career, I've kind of always had an opportunity to kind of do some complicated projects. Now, the university weren't necessarily complicated in the context of MEP, but when I did a stint at Intel Corp, working for Turner Construction, it was all Intel work. And
So you
so
went to Turner. Okay.
Class 1 clean rooms, I did added a UPS to their existing data center out there. I mean, it was, did some fit ups with them, like a bunch of different projects, I did with Intel when I was at Turner. And so that kind of brought me into the mission critical world, was probably some of my first steps. And then, that's kind of fast forwarding, but had done some major CAT projects, some really big stuff at the university, kind of moved on, wanted to get back to the GC side from the owner's rep side, and worked for Turner doing that.
So you went GC, Oregon, came down and did GC in California, then went to an owner's rep, and then back to a GC, and the one you went to is Turner.
Yeah.
Which has a huge development and training program. Isn't that where Matt and, half of Matt's team's from there too, right?
That's right. Yeah, so Turner does, Turner's an interesting organization. So I had a handful of years of experience before I went to Turner, and was sent out to the...
How old were you around that time, you think? Like 26, 27?
Trying to remember.
Were you a PM, or were you still...
Yeah, I got hired as a PM. So I ended up finishing my master's, but I did it in construction management at East Bay.
Okay.
At Cal State East Bay in Hayward. And one of my classmates worked for Turner. And so she kind of recruited me over, Phyllis recruited me over to go work for Turner. And I was a strategic hire. They were like, this was in like 2000, I'm guessing 2009, 10, 11. I need to go back. I'm sure my LinkedIn probably tells everybody.
Sure. I don't remember those stuff either.
Yeah, needed to go back and take a look, but it was something around that time. But came on as a project manager. They sent me out, and it was kind of funny. I didn't know where I was going. It was more of like, hey, you should just come join Turner and come and be a part of, what we're doing. I was like, sounds great. Ended up getting sent out to Intel. And
where was that at? Was that in
Santa Clara?
Okay, so you were doing
Intel
where were you living then?
In Livermore. Yeah, so when we moved back from California or from Oregon, we lived with my in-laws for a short stint, and then we got an apartment through some friends at church, and then the market crashed. And I was doing a project with O'Connor in Pleasanton called the Firehouse Arts Center. It's this really cool, it was a renovation of an old 1920s fire station in the 1960s. So we tore down the 1960s and then kept the 1920 fire station, redid it, and turned it into a performing arts theater. Just a really cool,
Sure.
But it was like we put the job out to bid in the midst of, the Great Recession. It was, it was like the bid numbers were, and it was a hard bid job. You get to learn, really fast about like completion of documents and all that fun stuff. And it was, I think it was like $8 million and $11 million. Like
a lot of disparity then.
and you kind of got to go with the low number, right? And but it ended up being a pretty good project. And but that was probably one of the long-term, and I still talk to him today. His name is Randy Stewart. He was probably my first mentor.
Randy Stewart, and he was at Turner.
Yeah, no, this is at O'Connor. So I backed up a little bit. This is 2008. This is with O'Connor Construction Management. Randy's, worked for Marriott for 20, 30 years, ran, all their Western projects for the longest time, and then had done consulting, lives in Pleasanton, and just kind of took me under his wing and taught me everything he knew. And so he's a guy I still actually connect with when I'm back in California. We grab coffee. Is he still in the game? He is. Yeah. He's still running projects for O'Connor Construction Management and stuff. And yeah.
And they do a whole thing. I mean, they're a full GC shop.
No, so O'Connor's the owner's rep. So we were the owner's rep on that project.
Got it. Okay.
For the city of Pleasanton.
I gotcha. Okay. And then by then, had you been involved with any other data centers, or was it just between the bank in Tennessee and now Intel, which has
which kind of happened a bit afterwards. So it was like Tennessee, ignore the first piece of California for a minute, did some hospital stuff up in Oregon, moved down, started working for O'Connor, worked for a developer for a short blip. That was that small family owned, didn't quite work out.
Sure.
Went to go work for an
I've had one of those.
Went to go work for an owner's rep, and that was O'Connor. And that was my first job was at that Firehouse Arts Center in Pleasanton. So when the market crashed, I was like, honey, my wife, Ann, I was like, let's go buy a house. And so we bought a house in Livermore.
Good for you.
And so we lived in that house for 14 years or so. And until we moved out to
Denver.
Yeah, out to Denver. And so, so short commute, Pleasanton, Livermore, no big deal. That job wrapped up. And then I went out to work at San Jose State and started working on their major cap projects.
Okay. So that's probably 30 miles to the west, but probably takes 2 hours to drive or something.
Yeah, on a good day.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, just like any good construction worker, you show up
6
super
a.m.
early.
Yeah.
And so that way you can beat the traffic, and, you always have aspirations of leaving early.
So you were, did you spend those first few years at Turner in the trailer?
Yeah. So on the job site. So when I was at Turner, it was actually at Intel's campus, doing Intel work. And, it was out at their SC1, SC2 campuses in Santa Clara.
How long were you on those programs for?
3 years.
Oh, no kidding. So you got to work on the same project at Turner for 3 straight years?
Yeah, well, it was their Turner at the time had this national agreement with Intel where they were doing pretty much all their 20 million and under as negotiated jobs. So I was in that program for the Santa Clara market.
Did you, there's a lot of talented people that have come from there, there's no doubt. Did you find a lot of value working there?
Yeah, a tremendous amount of it. And I think that it's kind of where you first start learning and understanding. I think it continued to solidify because I did some controls projects at the university. They had a central plant, a cogen, so like Rolls-Royce jet engine that's producing,
cool.
that's all connected to a or connected to a generator that's producing their power, and then also has creating steam for their steam distribution. So there was like a controls project, and you get to learn a lot about, again, continuing that MEP experience, continuing that distribution. What does it mean to, run steam lines across a campus? So kind of started probably, or especially after doing hospital work, kind of really started in focusing more into the controls and what does it mean to commission and what does it mean to work in the critical, because taking down that cogen meant significant dollars to the university because if that plant goes down, which produces all of their energy, they now have to pull from the grid, which means they're paying PG&E. And PG&E has, peak charges, all that type of stuff. So it was, kind of living in that critical world, and then getting over to Intel kind of just continued to solidify that for me and in that context. And then they have some of their own data centers, and so doing fit up projects, adding busway, adding a UPS, adding a PDU here and there, just different little smaller kind of TI type of projects for Intel, and then doing some complete renovations of Class 1 clean rooms for their tool installs and all that.
Did you enjoy doing the semiconductor stuff at all?
Oh yeah, I mean,
more than data centers?
Well, I mean, I was in a different role. I was doing more of the hiring GC, or hiring subcontractors, working, issuing contracts, writing scope of works, negotiating, because all the stuff that we did was all negotiated.
Yeah.
So negotiating making sure we have a complete scope, kind of got into the design build world and, getting to manage design build projects and all that type of stuff. So it was, I don't know. I mean, I think what you'll find about me is I just love construction. I mean, that's kind of I just love construction.
That's great. It sounds like it was in the family genes. When you left Turner, why did you leave Turner and where did you end up going?
Turner continued they kind of went through a bit of a turmoil in the north.
Was Matt Tyndall there when you were there? He ran like their mission critical practice. I think he was out of New York or Atlanta or something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was mainly focused in the Bay Area. I mean, it was going it was a tough market in the Bay Area during the downturn, the 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, like all of that. It was just even though there was a lot of work happening in the Bay Area, it was still just a very tough market.
To get work or?
To get work and to keep it. And, owners were trying to,
beat you down.
And Turner's relatively risk adverse. And, it becomes a bit more of a, yeah.
Did you do any data centers when you were at Turner as well?
Just the smaller, nothing ground up, nothing like
stuff.
that, but just all the small stuff when I was doing the Intel program.
Why, did you hit a plateau and you're like, I'm not being challenged anymore? So
Yep.
So when you transitioned, what'd you do?
I went to go work directly for the university at San Jose State.
Really?
And started as a project manager, then got promoted pretty quickly to the associate director, and then managed that capitals project, like $200-300 million in
really
capital projects.
So everything they were building, you quarterbacked that stuff?
Yep.
It's a big program. So did you have Were you running it the same? Were you going negotiated the whole way through, or
So that was
design, bid, build days?
no, it was actually we were so CSU. So San Jose State's a part of the California State University system, and they were actually pretty progressive. A guy by the name of Jim Sauerbauer, who was their chief of construction. So how it kind of works is that each university kind of has their own their own construction office, and then but at the chancellor's office is kind of like the mothership. Mm-hmm. And so in that mothership kind of world, they kind of standardize your documents, all that type of stuff. Jim had recently retired. He actually came down and consulted with us. So Jim retired from the CSU, being the chief of construction for all of CSU, and then consulted for San Jose State. So I got to work with him at San Jose State, which was, again, another great opportunity to work with a guy that he'd been in the industry for a very long time. Him and I actually worked together on what we called at the time design risk. And it was before progressive design build. But it was the genesis of it, which was basically combining a design build, like the traditional, design build bridging document, take a bridging document to bid, and and then you're kind of wondering what you're going to get as the end result, because you hope that your spec was good enough for them to design to, right? To taking that with this progressive approach, taking CM at risk, which, as we know, brings on the GC early, lets them do pre-con, constructability, estimating services, all of that stuff to make sure you're tracking towards where you'd want to go. And so we kind of merged those two together, which was, well, you don't have to just do the estimate, but you actually need to manage the design to help us get to where we were trying to get to. And what we want is we want this type of building. And so we did these progressive design build. At the time, we called it design risk, and got to kind of work through and write these contracts, and how do we navigate and how do we do this the best way, which kind of continue to further this idea of collaboration, like let's work together, but doing it in a contractual perspective versus then, hey, these are just the terms that we live within, but actually having the opportunity, being an owner, to step in and say, well, how can I affect that? How can I change that? And so,
did you have some autonomy?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, obviously, we always had to live within the rules of the government, right? Yeah. Within what we were required to do based off of law. But having that and working through that and having that autonomy was awesome. And so, like, how do you actually think about? It was kind of probably where I fell in love with being an owner, which came into, well, I have this ability to figure out how to do it the best way in totality, not just for the owner, but for everybody, right? For the contractors, for the owner, for everybody, and how to kind of, and so that's kind of where my love of design build and more collaborative ways of doing contracting, that's kind of where I stepped in and got my certification in Design Build Institute of America, which actually is more about like how do you do collaborative ways of doing contracting.
Did you ever find yourself falling back into like a bad habit to where like there's so many complicated pieces of that project, but when it came to the construction or the concrete stuff, it would like prick you up and you're like, oh, I'm going to go deep into that side? No,
it just made it easier for me to call BS on things.
I've seen that. And we've worked with a lot of very sophisticated end users that are armed to the teeth, and seems like somebody's a subject matter expert on something. And when every time we fall into the wheelhouse of somebody's, like, even on the finance side, we were helping some private equity groups, and they had an asset manager that I guess he was a structural architect back in the day. So like we could have told him anything and he would have believed it. But if we had any comment or any message or any mention of something that had to do with his discipline that he went to school for, we would basically have to write dissertations for him on those things, just because that's what he knew the best, and he wanted to contribute and be involved in some way. So,
luckily, to me, I think if you ask my team, my general motto is be fair and reasonable. And so, it's like we don't need to get down to the weeds, but I would say, if anything, my kind of varied experience has helped, especially being on a subcontractor, working for, because one of the first job, I shouldn't say first, but when I was at Charter, we were a subcontractor to Turner out in Nashville, right? And so we were working on a job at Vanderbilt Medical Centers. It was Imaging Institute out there, and I was a sub working for a GC. So I kind of had the opportunity to sit around the table in all the different seats, kind
Yeah.
of understanding the different perspectives. And I kind of use that more in the context of how do we collaborate. And then if I can understand what drives you, then I can change the way I say things, not the actual what I'm saying or where I'm
The
trying to get
context,
to,
though, yeah.
but it helps us connect quicker, which then lets us become more efficient, lets us be able to drive things faster. So
All the same reasons why we're doing this right now, right? We were having that conversation on the way here. I'm like, the genesis is we were talking about how you have a very purposeful commitment to investing into the relationships with your partners that you work with today. And it's probably because you're on the owner side now, but you've been on the other side of the ball plenty enough times to understand that, having a healthy relationship with your partners allows you to move the needle. Not maybe always economically, but when it comes to speed of market, which seems to be regardless of what the number one KPI is, it does seem as though that one is always tied for first, right? So I think if you come back and you look at your experiences and how you've tried to moderate the way that you engage with each different group, it's no different here, right? You're asking me like, hey, why did you even do this? We have DCAC Live. Why are we doing this thing? And I'm like, ironically enough, the two biggest complaints we always had is there's always an outlier at every conference. There's always one or two people that just kind of knock the cover off the ball, we say. And then the complaints that we would have is, look, I either need more of that or more of them or more cowbell, so to speak, or I need more conferences where I can have more opportunities to engage. So I was like, what if you wanted more from those people and I didn't want to dilute DCAC's one annual event by having multiple markets, why wouldn't I just create some sort of additional platform to where I could go high, wide, and deep into that?
Yep.
And you were like, well, why are you doing it? I'm like, well, I'm hoping that by the time that we're done, right now there are people that are able to bring you value and they don't know how to engage with you in a way in which they could offer you a way in which you could discover that value. And ultimately that's what you both want to find. They want to figure out a way to put points on the board and grow their business. And you ultimately will find something that you otherwise may not have been able to discover that could help you move the needle on one of those, major top 3 KPIs that you have. And ultimately you have to be open-minded, so when you stop, you evolve or die, right? So when you stop learning,
that's right.
it's when you start having these problems. But when you were at Turner and then you left, like at what point when you left Turner, where'd you go?
So, starting to get to know each other. So I got to make sure I get my years right. I think it was 2015.
Don't worry, we have 11 fact checkers in the back that are going to be
good. Hopefully they'll, yeah.
You met Grant and his posse back there. He's got a ton of guys, but go ahead.
Good. So, well, I'd get probably more in trouble with my wife on this one, but my son passed away.
Ooh.
And so was going hard at the university, loving what I was doing, working on a lot of different projects. It was, loving it, but was spending a lot of time at work. My son passes away, it kind of resets. You kind of wake up from some things. And
everything in life shifts to top dead center.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of realize that you need to spend time. You need to spend more time, especially in that moment, in that time. And I think that's what's important for managers or even people in general is that, things happen and we have to be okay and be agile to move to those. And I look at that across, if it's in business, if it's in your life or whatever it is. And so don't be afraid to say, I need to make a change. And it's not forever, because I think humans, we generally think decisions that we make are forever, and they're not. And I think as you get older, you realize that's not the case. But sure. I think for a lot of people younger, they think that, if I make this decision, I'm forever going to be stuck in this thing. And that's not necessarily the case. So, so Turner to the university, and then my son passes away, and then I got a job at Lawrence Livermore National Lab.
Wow.
Which is I live in Livermore.
Sure.
Right next to my house. They had I went from running a major capital program to running a handful of little projects as a construction manager at the lab.
That freed up your bandwidth so you could kind of
spend time with family.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's where my time needed to be spent.
Exactly.
And so, which was so very blessed to have the opportunity to go work. Like, think about it. Like, who would have ever thought I could have worked right next to my house for 3 years at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in a very low stress environment, still doing some cool projects. They actually have HPC, high performing computing there. And so, just kind of getting in a bit of the data center, advanced manufacturing, but at a very different pace.
Oh, government pace.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a very different pace. Exactly. A government pace is a lot slower, but it's what I needed.
Sure.
So I spent 3 years doing that, and very comfortable, not needing to go anywhere. That's when I built that house, on my back property in Livermore, because I had a bit of free time, but I'm at home. And so, I've always found myself doing, trying to find and do something. And so, but doing high tech projects, doing medium, like I actually did a medium voltage distribution job there, because Lawrence Livermore they have their own power. So they're on their own utility. So they have their own medium voltage team. They call them high voltage team. It's really medium voltage, but they have their own team there. So I, as a construction manager, project manager, did projects for them. And, ultimately people saw what I could do, and I ended up taking on, the estimating and scheduling department. And then, you end up taking on a little bit more and a little bit more. And but it gave me the time really where I could still, do 40 hours a week, put my time in and go home. And my drive home was 15 minutes. And it was, I could be home and you could literally do a 9 to 5, if you will. And I was home at 5:15, and which is what my family needed. It's what I needed. You got to have time to mourn and time to process and time to work through that stuff. And so I did that about 3 years, but still continuing the technical aspect of my career, still continuing the relationships and management, and, kind of being given opportunities, even at Lawrence Livermore. So yeah, I did that for 3 years.
What do you think you learned there that you didn't learn working for non-government programs? Like, not just the altitude and airspeed they probably operate at, but like, was there a process or a means or a methods that maybe what we were doing, like what you see on the data center side is all about volume and velocity, right? So we're not necessarily going through the what could take 20 steps to the government program is getting done in 8 steps in what we do, because we're kind of combining, compacting certain things, and then leveraging or are leaning heavily on those subject matter experts based on their experience, right?
Yeah, I would say that probably the big thing that I learned there was it further sharpened my ability to get people to do things that had no need or desire to do what you needed them to do, because they were,
Was there like a level of mediocrity there that you found?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And look, I worked with some amazing people there.
I'm sure.
And just great people. But yeah, it was another level of bureaucracy. It probably flows a little bit into my, sometimes people think that process is going to fix your problem. And I would always refer them back to the federal government. And if you want to look how process doesn't fix your problem, I mean, how many of our like major government projects are over budget, over schedule, like
poor execution, not
poor execution, but yet they have more processes and procedures than you can shake a stick at.
That's like the same argument, and like we don't ever really talk about like politics and stuff like that here, but there was a conversation where people were like, some of the cities that have the most extreme gun laws have some of the most extreme gun violence, right? And I'm not applying that to one party or the other, but it's just, I hear what you're saying. Sometimes you could impose certain rules, and it doesn't necessarily always mean it's going to help you.
Right. So, and that's exactly right. And so, which goes back to, and what I tell even my teams now is I hired you to think, right? Like I hired you because we can say, hey, this is the process as well enough. Like it's hopefully to be a general roadmap, like a North Star, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't veer. Or if you're like, if you're like, hey, I need to go here, but there's a cliff in front of you. Well, and it's literally right in front of you. That doesn't mean you can't turn a little bit left and take the stairs. Well, but I need you to think to do that versus saying, well, the procedure says I just follow that North Star.
When you adopted that methodology, though, was it because you found yourself getting pent up with frustration because that model or that opportunity to think freely, it didn't exist? So you were like, man, if we just had the ability to just unleash me and give me the ball, so to speak, then let me sort it? Or was it because someone gave you the ball and you were able to be unleashed and you found a lot of value in that? You were more fulfilled professionally, and because of that, you were way more productive. Which of those two?
I would say neither. Oh. And I'll tell you, I would say I took the ball and said, here's my objective. So what I say is that we all have confines that we have to work or live within, right? Even so, at the lab, there was rules that we had to live within. Well, I just figured out how to navigate those rules faster. Right? So it's about being agile, being able to navigate
Flexible.
through that, being flexible and saying, and helping people along to say, oh, well, yeah, that's what it says, but it doesn't say I can't go do this.
Sure.
And
So
so
understanding the limitations.
yeah, and then getting people to think outside of that box of, well, because they assume, right? We make assumptions about what that means and what that says, and it's like, well, no, we can actually navigate through that, and we don't have to, and not doing anything nefarious, not doing anything wrong. It's just another way to work at it versus being like, no, we can actually push this along. We don't have to like. It just says you need to get there at the end of the day. It doesn't say that you have to go down the cliff. You can actually go take the stairs that are there to the left, or whatever analogy you want to use. And so you help people navigate through that to say we can still do it. Like I had to do earned value management. Well, great, but I wanted to do it in a way that was actually going to support my project. And so how do you set up the information and get it set up in a way that's going to help you and navigate through that? So I would say that it just continued to refine. Like, don't let the limitations of what your perceived circumstances are to keep you from being successful, because you can navigate through that. We were still able to get I did a project there. I was still able to get done. It was a medium voltage distribution job. We were still able to get completed on time, on our budget, even with all those procedures and processes. And we followed them all, but we were still able to navigate through and come up with creative ways to still press forward and get through it.
Did you ever find yourself facing any resistance from people that were like, hey, slow down, settle down? We have
a little bit, but it was usually support groups, not necessarily my direct group. And so, and because I think people were genuinely happy to see things progressing because it was the right thing. And it kind of goes back to, I kind of had this conversation. One of the things I'm very much we haven't talked about it. I'm very much about mentorship and growth. Like I taught it at Cal State East Bay after I finished my master's degree. I taught there for 6 or 7 years.
Really?
Evenings.
What was that all about?
Just teaching construction management, wanting to pass on the things that I'd learned. And
so was it like 1 night a week, 2 nights a week?
Yeah, it was usually one night. If it was 2 nights a week, it was usually pretty. But I think I might have done that 1 or 2 semesters, a bit too much. But generally 1 night a week, teaching in the master's program or teaching in the continuing ed program. But it was all about like, for me, continuing to sharpen my skills, but then also to give opportunities. And there's a couple people who've, there's one that works at Vantage who was one of my students.
Oh, I was going to ask you if you ever hired one.
Another, a lady that I was at the lab at the time, and she came to work at the lab, helped her get a position at the laboratory, not my group, but, doing what she wanted to do. And so, very much, that's kind of one of my loves and passions is growing. Growing. And so I had to do a skip level meeting, and then I also do skip level one-on-ones for some people within our organization. And, for me, the big thing is just like encouraging them to like think about what you're working on, like how, like always do the right thing. And so like at one of my last skip levels is like my objective when I was at Lawrence Livermore National Lab was to do the right thing for the lab. No matter what, do the right thing for the lab. My motto at Vantage is do the right thing by Vantage. And I expect the people who work at Vantage, and I expect my third parties and do the right thing for Vantage. Right?
Gotcha.
Just do. And
where did you learn that from? Was that your dad working with your dad?
Yeah.
Do the right thing by the customer?
Yeah. I think it's just, you only have one reputation, right? You only have one, you got to live with yourself. And so life's too short to be worried about what's going to come back and bite you.
Sure.
And it's not to say that I don't make mistakes or that people don't make mistakes, but that's different than doing something nefarious or intentionally not doing the right thing.
Mistakes are necessary, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so, and it's about encouraging people, like focus on doing the right thing for Vantage, do the right thing for your company, wherever you're at, like do the right thing for the company. And so that to me has been just a big part of, and that means also because doing the right thing for my vendors and treating them well, fair and reasonable, which we kind of talked about a little bit, is so important to me because if I'm fair and reasonable with them, then they're going to continue to, hopefully be.
It's that simple, isn't it? It's not that simple for some people though, but that's an advantage, right? Because there are people that are out there putting their boots to people all the time. They're like, it's okay. Right. So I was telling you, we were talking about it on the drive here. I'm like, I remember we were doing a program in Virginia, and it was so massive that we had to have 2 different electrical contractors, and they're big shops. And we weren't sure if we were going to be able to get one of the other shops that we wanted. And we were lucky. It wasn't as though we were paying better than the other group. It's just that we weren't offering as much brain damage. Like, we were engaging with them and collaborative with them. And it was surprising to see how much more you could get with honey than vinegar, And we learned a lot about really investing heavy into those relationships because they pay dividends in the long term, don't they?
Well, yeah. And I think the thing I also mentioned, and I also have to remind myself, is that we're all human. And
bad days,
good days, but like, people are really just trying to earn a living.
Yeah.
Right? Like, in general, and I'm not saying there aren't outliers, and we can talk about,
Sure.
the outliers all we want. But in general, people, no matter if it's the project manager for the MEPs, or if it's for the GC, or if it's for the owner's rep, or if it's for the owner, like, they're all, like, they got families. They're trying to make a living. They're trying to do well by their family. They're trying to do well by themselves. And if you can keep that in context as you're engaging with them and you're having conversations with them, like, it'll go, like, if you always remember that, it'll go, like, it'll take you so far. And,
Sure.
And how you engage with people, and what you, because we make a lot of assumptions, like, oh, that person just wasn't paying, they cut me off. Well, how do you know they're not trying to race off to see their mom before they pass away?
There you go.
You just don't know, right? We assume the worst in others, generally. And what I would encourage people to do is, like, actually assume the best. Assume, like, there's a misunderstanding.
Yeah, because it could be us that's cutting someone off on accident because we had I've done that. I mean, you saw me do that today, actually, right? Where I was like, my bad. But listen, it's going to happen. That's why I don't ever lay on the horn with anybody, because it's the same things. I'm like, listen, it all gives and takes. Like, even when my kids were participating, and they participate in sports, there would be like, a bad call here, a bad call there. I'm like, my kids would be all upset. And I'm like, it all balances itself out. You're going to have calls that should be called that aren't, and it's going to be in your favor. So, like, just ride it out, right? So, but you end up at the lab, and is that where you met Jennifer?
Volbrick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's awesome. Marine, right? So I'm really, we think really highly of her and everything that she's doing, right? You ended up leaving the lab, though. Is that where you went straight? Did you go to another GC first, or did you go straight to?
I went to Vantage.
How did you go to there?
So I get called by a recruiter and says, hey, there's a project manager role for a data center developer in Santa Clara. And I'm like, there's only one that I could think of. And the reason that was the case is because Spencer Myers, who I worked with back in the day when he was with Alphatech and I was with Turner.
Oh, that's right. He was Alphatech.
And Alphatech was doing work for Turner on one of my projects. That's where I got to know Spencer, his wife Jennifer, and,
awesome guy.
Yeah, awesome guy. And I told the recruiter, I said, thanks, but no thanks, not interested.
Did you know Spencer was there, or was Spencer
I
there
knew
yet?
Spencer was there because of LinkedIn. It's the only way I kind of, I knew he was there. And so I just said, hey, thanks, but no thanks. And I asked her the question. I said, hey, is Spencer Myers the hiring manager? And she goes, he is. And I said, well, tell Spencer I said hi.
Did Spencer know that you were applying?
Well, I hadn't necessarily applied because I just got called by a recruiter.
Okay, so
when I told her thanks but no thanks, but hey, let Spencer know I said hi, because I hadn't probably talked to him in a handful of years.
Sure.
She was like, oh, okay. Call it 2 weeks, a month later, I get a phone call back from her, and she goes, we actually have a director role that we're looking to hire, and Spencer
says you can
yeah, Spencer wants you to apply for that role. And I said, now we're talking. Sounds good. That was willing to get me out of my cushiness at the lab, my 40 hours a week out of the laboratory to go. And so go off and meet with Spencer. We do a thing called CBBI. It's cognitive behavioral based interviews. And so it's where you go through and they ask you, tell me about a time when type of questions. We still do it today, which I think is a great process. It really helps you get to know.
So what do you do? I want to understand this more.
Yeah. So in the interview process, so we kind of do a tech interview to begin with. And then after that tech interview, we do
The tech interview is based on construction.
Yeah. So depending on what position, if you're doing finance, it's finance. The hiring manager usually is going to ask you questions like, can you actually chop the wood you're supposed to chop?
Yeah.
And the subject that you're supposed to make it happen. And then after that, then they have a panel, but it's individual meetings where they give them topics like, customer service or integrity or thinking critically or you name it. And they ask you questions about, tell me about a time when, and it's called cognitive behavioral based interviewing. And it's all about versus, hey, just answer these questions and people can kind of BS the answers because they can know what you want to answer. This is more about like, tell me about a time when you had a difficult customer and what did you do?
Okay. Yeah, because it's inevitable. Right.
Or tell me about a time when you failed, or tell me about a time you had to make a difficult decision that no one would have known about, like i.e. around integrity or whatever it is. And so I spent a Friday going through all those interviews.
There's really no prepping for that, right? You want to have some sort of canned something, but it'd be pretty transparent that you're being genuine.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I think the intent is to be genuine. So that's interviewed, got the position, and then I worked on our CA2 campus. It's our second campus in Santa Clara.
How long ago was this? How long have you been at Vantage, I guess?
3 years and 7-8 months.
So you started there as a director
in September of
less than 4 years ago.
Yeah, September of 18.
And let me ask you, based on your data center experience, would you hire a director with your data center experience?
Yeah, and
Spencer knew you, so that obviously validated a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that helped. And I'll say yes, because there's a guy on my team who's a senior director. His name's Simon Casey, and he runs our Western side. And he came from, never done a data center in his career, but he did work at SFO for 10, 12 years, did other projects, interviewed well. But also I got a phone call from Brett Boncher, COO over at Cupertino.
Okay.
And he said, hey, I heard that Simon Casey applied. You got to hire him.
Really?
He's great.
Did he work for Cupertino at the time?
So no, it was that he was. Simon was an owner's rep up at SFO.
Oh, gotcha.
And the Cupertino respected Simon so much that I got a call from Brett, which I was like, that's kind of.
If vendors are putting themselves out.
Yeah. I was like, that's kind of bizarre, but cool.
Yeah.
And, it kind of just continued to solidify. And Simon is, again, didn't have any data center experience. He's been with us for a bit over a year. I might be getting that wrong. He might be here for 2 years, but whatever period of time it's been, and he's crushing it and had no data center experience.
Okay. So you would go back and hire. Okay. So what is it that offset the experience that helped you feel comfortable? Was it his knowledge on general construction or the fact that vendors in the ecosystem liked him? And because if they like you, they're going to make sure that you're successful, right? So that means they won't let you fail in those programs, right? So what was it? Was it that he had, the chorus sings louder than the soloist, right? So he had enough support that you knew that he had.
I would say it was a couple things. His construction experience was,
it's
amazing, right?
10, 12 years at SFO.
Yeah. And then had plenty of experience before that. Right. And so that was a piece of it, but I would say obviously just, I felt culturally he'd fit well, but I would also say that it had to do, SFO, it's a bit of mission critical, right? You can't just take down a gate or like it also has a aspect of mission criticalness. Then also that it was kind of like not just one thing, it was kind of that chorus of things of then also, hey, look, I think he put down was one of his references as being one of the GCs that he did work with. Then also having a call from Brett, and understanding those things. And it was like, he can figure it out. It kind of goes, so born in Northwest Arkansas, the home of Walmart, in Bentonville, one thing that Sam Moulton said was, I'm not the smartest guy, I just hire them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably been my whole life. I'm not the smartest guy. And I don't necessarily hire them. What I did was I tried to figure out, hey, oh, you know this? Well, can you help me out with this? Like being humble enough to say, I don't know that, but you do. Can you help me out with this? Hey, can you help me out with this? And I felt like Simon has a bit of the same thing, that he's not afraid to say, I don't know data centers. I know how to do contracts. I know how to be fair and reasonable, and I know how to get people to do things they need to do. I mean, I can name Rob Geyer, who is one of my students who works for us now. He's delivered now 1 or 2 DMs with us in Santa Clara. He's leading our 3rd building on that 2nd campus. He'd never done data centers before, and it's not to say that we also then put the support. We put the right MEP support with them. That way they're not set up for failure. They're set up for success. But as they do that, they're learning and growing. Another guy by the name of Justin Douglas, who worked with me. And I remember when it was probably, I'd probably been with Vantage for 6 or 8 months. And he goes, I don't know anything about MEP. And I said, don't worry, we'll figure it out.
We have people that do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. And
Immersion.
Exactly right. And we're kind of doing the same thing up in Canada, where we're taking those people who understand how to do work the Vantage way, to deliver for our customers, and we're sending them to Canada to help those. And what I tell them is their job is to work themselves out of a job. We need them to stand on their own to deliver their projects up there and then come back down, and we got plenty of other work for you to do down here. So I don't, this might not be very popular in the data center world, but like, especially as fast as we're going to have to continue to find great talent outside of the data center, like sphere.
I can't agree with you more. I've hired a lot of people in my time, and when you do enough hires, you make bad hires sometimes too. And over the course of time, like I said, failure is necessary, because you don't learn anything from the things you do well. For every good hire I make, like a Jesse or an Anthony, make a bad one, right? And sometimes I try to go back. I have I'm pretty critical and try to analyze and interpret what I'm doing wrong. And I find comfort in a certain level of experience. But if I were to go back and look at, like, why did I hire Jesse? I just told you that story. Well, he had a chip on his shoulder, right? He had something to prove, right? Anthony, I hired him coming out of the military too. And he was born and raised in a construction environment with his family. But again, no real data center. He wasn't used to doing programs of that scale, right? Data centers are pretty intense, very, a lot of capital going into such a small box. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And he had grit, right? He's like, man, I was a crane operator too, so I could know how to operate the backhoe. I was, he was doing all kinds of things on these programs. And I found it was those people that, I guess the word that Pat Lencioni uses is hungry, right? They were just, I just need to find hungry. So when you go and you look for people to join your team, what's the number one thing you look for?
I would probably say the biggest thing is cultural fit.
Okay, so how do you break that down? What are you looking for specifically from a cultural perspective? Like the social dynamic and chemistry is important, but is there something else that's there that you need to see under the hood, that like they have to be self-driven? They have to be motivated because that fits your culture? Or
I think the other thing is that, our world is so dynamic. They also have to kind of have, we were talking about Jocko Willink a bit earlier, right? Like they kind of have that extreme ownership.
Yeah.
And that extreme ownership doesn't mean that you do everybody else's job for them. It means that you have an objective. It's to deliver your project, and you pull in the resources and you make happen what needs to get happen, obviously ethically, morally, and legally.
Sure.
To deliver your job, sure. Right? And so I think that's the other piece. And as I step back and I look at it, I was even having a conversation today with Rob, and I said, Rob, like, we have a problem with the budget here, but it's not like, it is yours to manage, but it's not yours to carry on your own. That's why we have a team.
Sure.
Right. And so if there's something that's coming that somebody's trying to throw on your project that doesn't seem right, you need to bring that up to me or to his boss, right? Simon, actually, he works for Simon. I'm like, you need to bring it up to Simon, and we'll work this out together. And then you can't think about it as a failure. The extreme ownership is I'm dedicated to deliver what my North Star, this project, and to make it happen. And that means you have to use all the resources. And sometimes that's your management. Sometimes that's other people in the organization. Sometimes that's our vendors, wherever it may be, to step in and to help you deliver that. That's having the extreme ownership. It's not doing it all yourself. Well,
I think that's the balance that we have when we have teams underneath us. Is it's you're trying to figure out what's the maximum amount I could put on this person to where they could maximize their success before you hit that fine line where it becomes failure, right? And trying to understand what each person's individual capacity is, right, to carry whatever burden it is they have in the scope of their job. So for me, I was always like, okay, there are certain people that have amazing skill sets with, and as an example, like for us, we have people that deal with pressure really well. They don't even get rattled a little bit. And that could be because, we have a lot of former military that are used to getting shot at, and they're like, wait a second, no one's getting blown up or shot at today.
Life's good.
We'll go talk about the budget, but I'll live, you'll live, we'll all go home, right?
Yeah.
So it's all perspective. It's the aperture in which you view it through, I guess, is how you determine how you're going to respond to that challenge. But when you look for someone and you're looking for a cultural fit, you're looking for someone that is going to kind of be willing to, they're brave enough to raise their hand and say, I don't know.
And they're going to own it.
And then they're going to own the responsibility to go learn it?
Yeah, and they're also going to own the project.
Okay.
Or own whatever the task is. Like, the other thing that, I would say that they're going to own, like if I can trust that they're going to own it, like that's a hell of a lot better than having to kick them.
Sure.
But if I know that they're going to own it, that to me is that, the other pieces of then that aspect of EQ are actually like understanding what does it mean to drive, to have those relationships, because in our world, no one's doing anything alone.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
sure.
And there are obviously some, a technician, sure, they can go up and wire something and they're kind of generally doing it on their own, but we can have that theological debate for a
Sure.
if we want. But at the end of the day, especially in our world, you're not going at it alone, which means you need to figure out that relational aspect. And so being people smart, but also owning that project, having that extreme ownership to me is just something that's just crucially
So what do you
important.
do? What do you do as a leader? What do you do personally? Like you were telling me about how you're, this book you're reading or audiobooks you're listening to, or you're like, I'm not really a podcast guy. I don't listen to them all. Ironically enough, as you're on one, but you'll hopefully at least watch this one, right? So you have a lot of talent. I mean, like Matt, all those,
Yeah.
a lot of people.
I have an amazing team, no doubt.
No doubt. But like, did you work with those guys at Turner? Did you know them already? Or did
as we all, we benefit and we suffer from the the sins and good things of our forefathers. And so I would say that I had a bit of both of that, given the opportunity to become VP and then, recently promoted to senior VP, and, Matt Souders and a handful of others, like I had the benefit of they were there already doing good things. And then, I look at my job, especially for high performers like those guys, is to block and tackle and support. And one of the big things is just making sure I'm supporting them. And it's kind of being the conduit between our business being a developer and providing a quality product for our customers, operating all that stuff, but being that conduit between how they're making decisions and how they see reality, and then
how it's brought to life.
Then what's construction and how does construction play into that? And so I see myself as being that conduit between the construction group, giving them the support, giving them the blocking and tackling that they need to go off and be successful to do the right thing for Vantage, and for and then communicating, hey, here's risks, here's realities, here's the things that we can and cannot do, and then translating that in a way that's beneficial to the decision makers within our business.
What made you decide to go to Vantage? Because you live in a market.
Spencer,
Really? Because
flat out.
I got you.
And I would say Spencer and the opportunity, because knowing that I got to step back in doing what I was doing at the university of running a program, to kind of step in as a director and see multiple projects happen at once, get back, to kind of see something, and also doing like full stop, the lab, great place to work. And I had met Jennifer there, and as you mentioned, Jennifer's amazing. I can name off plenty of other people who were amazing. It's just I was looking for a different pace and more opportunity, more growth, and that is the biggest thing. I
did. You want to be in data centers, or did it just so happen that you knew Spencer?
I just happened to know Spencer.
And when you and Spencer crossed, when he was at Alpha Tech, which is a fantastic shop, by the way, a lot of good folks there that we have a lot of respect for. When he was there, were you guys doing a data center project together?
We were.
Okay. So you had worked with him in the context of data centers, and okay, that makes more sense too. And then in that time that you got there, like what's some of the things that you learned the most? Have you been humbled by anything? Have you made any big mistakes of your own?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Like what? Like hiring the wrong person, or
Yeah. I mean, so
that's the most humbling thing for me. I'm like, I don't even get involved with any of our hiring, right? Because I need to remain as objective and away from it as I can, right? And I'm like, I need you to staff your teams versus me telling you who to hire and who to pick. I just ask that they fall within this profile, right? Cultural, that's the number one thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And that's exactly right. And COVID has, a lot of people blame a lot of things on COVID. I still, and there's a realities behind that. And so it made it difficult for us to travel in some parts. So my preview is for North America. It made it difficult during COVID for me to get some places where I needed to get to because
Couldn't travel.
couldn't travel. So that was one of the complexities of that. And
It really pressure tested your teams, I guess, at that point, making sure that they were really capable.
yeah, and we had acquired a team that wasn't so much, and we're suffering from that. But it probably taught me a bit about perseverance, and then also continuing to push the team and how far can you, and understanding situations and how far can you push people, and then also to encourage people to persevere, because as you move up more and more in the organization, bad things are going to happen. Bad decisions are going to happen. Things, bad calls, things that you have zero control over are going to happen. And it's about how you respond to them and about how do you persevere through it. And so I would say one of the biggest things I've learned, especially probably over the past year and a half, has been about perseverance and saying, nope, we got to stick through it. And then also, how do you communicate that perseverance to the team to get them to continue to persevere through it? And I think that's what really helps refine people and refine the character. And you can't keep them in it forever, right? At some point in time, you do need to get through it. You do need to. And the good news is I think that we're relatively through some of those really, really tough times around that specific instance.
It was chaos. It was like a dumpster fire for a while where, the rules were changing daily for a while, remember?
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I mean, I remember being in my house in Livermore in 2020 and it all going down, and me being like walking the blocks in my neighborhood on calls on trying to figure out how do we keep different projects going, because we're critical infrastructure, right? People were working from home. They needed,
and your labor was essential.
That's right. And so how do we navigate through all that? But it wasn't just one market, it was all of our markets. Yeah. Now, obviously we face other challenges. And so, but I would say probably the biggest thing has been the perseverance on some things that maybe were outside of our control. And then you try to, you do a bit of soul searching and say, well, how much could I have affected that? And trying to be honest with yourself, because as you mentioned, and I couldn't agree more, is how do you recognize you failed, but being honest with it wasn't necessarily all of yours. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But then how do you do that in a good balance, in a way that you can say, okay, let me learn from that and let me figure that out. And so I think that was probably, and then stepping back and there's times where I'm at home and I'm like, screw this. Like I've had enough. Like this has just been rough. And so, and it being a leader to say, keeping that at home, if you will, or, internalized, or with maybe some trusted friends who don't necessarily work in your, directly, or if maybe they do work for directly, but you have a relationship with them that they understand, hey, we're all human, versus, maybe a project engineer who's, just trying to grind it out on the job and stuff. And so, to have that, that maturity and that context. And so, I would say probably the biggest thing that's the biggest thing. It's,
biggest challenge.
Yeah, has been perseverance, continuing to push through, continuing to go when you feel like it's just never going to end.
Well, what's been the most rewarding?
The teams, the
like
relationships.
Having the ability to work with amazing people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, hands down my favorite too.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's why I do a book club. Like I have a book club.
Yeah,
and,
we did that.
Yeah, I mean it's people who want to show up and join, and let's read a book. Let's
What kind of book?
we've done extreme ownership. We've
Of
done
course.
radical candor.
Do you do it like on your team? Like we made each GC have a book club, and then I'd go out and buy 30 boxes or 30 books, Amazon, whatever, and hand them out to everybody and be like, okay, hey, look, we're all in this together. And I mean, to the credit of those GCs, they bought in on those programs and adopted it, and it was the mindset or the philosophy that we wanted to have as an overlay for that entire campus, right? Because that was the culture. But we had it wasn't just to my team, it was really to the field teams too. We looked at them as an extension of us, right? And we couldn't be successful without our partners. So we were always, if it was good for us to read, like why wouldn't it bring them value too? So we were kind of, I think it helped us it was a vehicle for us to help them understand what our expectations of them were. Does that make sense? Like how to treat each other.
Yeah, how to engage.
How to engage with each other.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't take long on a construction program that has such aggressive timelines and so many massive challenges that could present itself from supply chain alone. Like I would have transformers falling off the back of trucks or stuff that would show up and like whatever protection they had inside of them. I was getting MPS containers that, something happened and the trucker didn't realize something fell off the bottom of it and everything's water on the inside. Like nothing ever showed up right. Does that make sense? And it was like triage du jour, right? So those books were helping us figure out how do we do it without everyone declaring war on each other and everyone just rolling up their sleeves and like one team, one dream in it, right? So what is...
Yeah, so my book club actually is just within the construction group Vantage. And for whoever wants to attend, I don't force it upon anyone.
Do you buy them a book?
Yeah, it's like buy the book, expensive. Like
we do the same.
Yeah.
Download the book. Here's your thing.
Yeah, if you want to audiobook it, go audiobook it. I get it, right? Yeah. But if you want to join and you want to continue to grow and learn, hey, come join it and then we discuss the book and we talk about it and say, hey, like.
Do you define the books or do you let them each like recommend a book or?
So it's been more of hey, here's a lot of good books that I've read.
Sure.
And then recently it was, hey, what book do we want to do? And
sure.
I said, hey, here's kind of an idea. Somebody else threw an idea. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good one. We should do that one.
And what are the books are they focused on like leadership and culture?
Yeah, I would say
teamwork.
Yeah, teamwork, leadership, culture. The name's escaping, but it's about how do you present yourself digitally, like texting or email or on Teams meetings or whatever, and how do you engage people, like kind of like the EQ, but digitally, because there's such a big piece of it where I'm sure you could get a text message from one person that says, okay, and you get a text message from another person that just says okay, and they can mean totally different things to you because you know them differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And just kind of being cognizant of that. And then in business and I'm sure you hear stories about somebody saying they got a text message that's like, oh no, or whatever it is, and then you don't hear from them and you're like, what happened? What went wrong? And our brains lead to the worst conclusions. So that's kind of how do we be better?
Does that start with you, or does there like the surreal or like the rest of the executive team have their own book club, I guess? Or?
So Chris Yetman, Yeti, he had books that he would have us read, and I would read through some of those, and then that's kind of gone by a bit of the wayside. But I picked that up, but I did kind of open it up more. That was more for like his direct reports when I reported up to Yeti, and that's kind of changed. I now report up differently through our president for North America, but so I've kind of carried that on, and I mean, it's always like, how do you find that balance? Because everybody's moving so fast. But I'm probably a bit different than a lot. I still do my best to read as many books as I possibly can.
I don't have like we were talking about this, and you're like, I'm actually reading a physical hard copy book right now. And I'm like, I don't remember the last time I've had the opportunity to do that. I'll be getting to that point, I think, in the next few years when I don't have as many kids in high school, I guess. So busy with sports and stuff that like the best I can do is listen to it while I'm driving down the road to get to the airport or while I'm getting ready to get on an airplane. But I don't normally have the ability to sit down with a book in my lap and just enjoy 2 hours of letting the pages, bathe over me. I have to listen to it while I'm on the run. And that's another reason why I love podcasts, right? Because, if you seem like you're a healthy, fit guy, I try to stay as healthy as I can. I'm trying to be as active as I can in the mornings that I'm not traveling. I'm trying to, go for a walk or a workout or hit the gym or whatever. And it was just something to pump into my ear holes. And the podcast gave me an opportunity to kind of sift through, versus an entire book is a large commitment of time. And I still listen to plenty of audiobooks, but I found that I could pull little pockets from these podcasts. Sometimes they're extremely relevant. They're talking about current events. So if you want to, learn something about Ukraine or something, who knows? But when we started this podcast, I had been on, Dave Liggett does an amazing podcast, Data Center Hawk, awesome guy. And Rich Miller at Data Center Frontier let me do one with them. And I was a little bit surprised to see how little, there's not a lot of podcasts in our space. So if back in your day when you were in Tennessee, if you did like podcasts or whatever, you may have been focused on construction because that's where your passion is and you love just building, but there wasn't really anything that opened it up to where I was like, okay, so what's it like to build in the data center vertical, right? And then how do you even become that? How do you become the SVP of a group like Vantage, right? And this story helps a lot of people there could be some kid in college right now at some construction company that's, whether he's getting a CM degree or concrete degree, and he's like, so I could one day build these massive, because I don't think there's anything more exciting than building data centers. I don't think there's anything as challenging. Maybe that's just me because I'm extremely biased, but I've got to build lots of fun stuff. Nothing's more like, nothing has more moving parts in my opinion so far. And I've never built, these big clean rooms for the Intels and stuff, but these data centers, there's only, so many different electrical and mechanical permutations or tier standards, but there's a lot of different ways to get there. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would. I would say that probably I would say that data centers are, like, when you think about the complexity, they're on the higher end of complexity, but there's obviously, as you just mentioned, there's more complex,
Sure.
right? Especially if you get to the nuke world, there's some systems that are far more complex. What I would say is that the speed that we also have to do it is what kind of amplifies the fun.
Intense.
Yeah, which to me is intense is fun, right? So that to me is what really pushes it, and that's kind of what I tell some of the new people who are joining Vantage, who have not done data centers before. I'm like, the buildings are complicated. They're not overly complicated. Like, I think a lot of people can understand how the systems work, right? If you have a general understanding of construction or engineering and stuff, I think it's not overly complicated that you need some massive degree to go figure it out. So they are complicated, but at the speed that you have to do it, and then the accuracy, because they have to work. And I think that's the other big piece, right? It's like, look, the air conditioning goes down in a student union or in an office building. Okay.
It's unpleasant.
Yeah, it's unpleasant, right? And also, if one goes down, it's unpleasant, but it's not.
It's not an SLA violation with liquidated damages.
Yeah, it's not the end. Yeah, it's not the end of the world
Right.
for when that happens. Where it's completely different for data centers, and I think that's what it's not only that they are relatively complex. We have to build them really fast, but then it's also they have to be right. Like the rigor that we go through for our commissioning and to make sure that they're going to work as we expect them to work, that they're going to do exactly as you expect them to do, is that to me, those three components is what I think provides that intensity, provides that fun with our industry, which, I've grown to love over, especially being fully immersed in it in the past, 3-4 years we have very much the blessing and the privilege to work in an amazing industry.
So what's the advice you give people when you just, like, I know what I try to tell people when we first hire them, once they're on board, I try to send them a nice note and be like, hey, listen, this is what you have to do to be successful. That's it. What do you tell people?
I probably try to tailor it. It depends on where they're coming from. So if they're coming from the general contractor side, it's helping them understand. Because if we hire somebody who has data center experience, but they're coming from the GC side, it's helping them understand what does it mean to be an owner. Because the picture,
because they think it's a contractor still.
Yeah, exactly. They think it's a contractor. So it's like, well, let me help you think about what does it mean to be an owner? Because it's different, and you have to think about different things. There's more than just one lever of cost and schedule for us, right? There's development, there's approvals, there's entitlements, there's financing, there's our customers that have to get moved into the space, or, hopefully we sell the space to that customer. Like, there's a handful of more moving parts than I'm going to use the word only, but as being a GC. So it depends on where they're coming from. Where if they have no data center experience, but they've been an owner before, well, it may be, okay, well, this is like, probably let's dive into what does it mean to commission a building. And because a lot of people don't, like we think commissioning, like a lot of builders will think commissioning a building and it's,
We're blowing the doors off it sometimes.
Where our commissioning is very rigorous.
Oh, for sure.
Very detailed. And so it depends on their background is usually the piece that I give them. But hands down, no doubt, it's like treat people well. Like I've seen people come in different companies, Vantage being one of them, where they step in and they basically say, you're doing it all wrong and this is the way you need to do it. How's
that work?
Yeah, we know how that works, right? It doesn't work well. And then I see people who step in and who learn and understand, and then they try to build upon the good work that's already been done. And when you do that, like that to me is that's the differentiator for a lot of people, especially as you are, joining a new organization, no matter where it's at. It's like step in and figure out what they've done well, and then how do you build upon what they've done well and continue that on. Because stepping in and telling them because we all make mistakes, and we generally know the mistakes that we've made. I think the other thing is we forget the limitations that sometimes people are faced. Like Monday morning quarterbacking a project, it's every construction person's worst nightmare.
For sure, but it happens every time.
And so it's like, encouraging people to say, well, did they have, like, where were they at in the midst of that? Was it the beginning of the pandemic? And that's obviously just still a bit relevant. Was it in the middle of the material crisis and supply chain crisis that we're currently in? Like stepping back and saying, well, what did they have to navigate? Like overall, are they better than the average bear based off of everything that they had to navigate to get there? And that's the thing that I think is like helping people step back and understand that. It to me is very helpful on like kind of getting to know people's story. Hey, where did you come from? Like kind of what you're doing here as a part of this podcast, but do the same thing as a part of everyday life, which is help me understand, like, where's this project been? What's this been like? What's this look like? Like that to me would be anybody stepping in to a new company or a new project. Hey, what have you gone through? What challenges have you had?
I've had the privilege of working for some amazing people in this space, and I credit a lot of them for whatever success of whatever kind I've ever been able to have. But the advice, that I try to give people when they come in, I don't really value his experience as much as most people, simply because I feel like think about this. You've been at Vantage for almost 4 years. Mm-hmm. The way you're building data centers today are probably not the same as what you were doing a year ago, let alone 4 years ago. And it's going to be massively different a year or 4 years from now. Would you agree?
Yep.
So that experience, the only positive I feel it ever gives anybody is confidence, right? Where they're going to be more willing to ask questions, right? Have the courage to ask questions. Like, hey, I don't get that, right? But I always tell people too, like, you're going to make mistakes. So you got to be a goldfish. Like, you got to put it behind you and keep moving forward. You got to be a goldfish, because the threats that they'll have won't come from us. Everything comes from outside the business. So like, don't worry about making a mistake and us playing Dr. Kevorkian with you, unless you do something that was ethically wrong. Other than that, this is the environment where you can make mistakes in, because we'll figure out what we need to work on, right? Good. Now we get to understand what we need to go fix. But I always tell people, I'm like, the advice that Peter Gross gave me when I was early in my career was, be careful the toes you step on today, because they could be connected to the ass you're kissing tomorrow. And you know what I'm talking about, right? Because you lived in Silicon Valley forever, and it wouldn't take long for the person that, when you were a GC, the person at Cupertino Electric could be the guy at Facebook that now you work for.
That's right.
And he's going to remember if you shafted him on that change order or hung him out or made his crew work wherever,
That's right.
They just don't forget. And I was always like when I hired Jesse at Aligned Energy, he was coming from CPS, which is a great owner's rep firm. And I remember saying to him, I go, hey, this is what I expect. The only reason why I'll ever fire you won't be from a mistake. But if you start destroying, like if you start being and flexing as an owner, because there's a lot of, you have a lot of power as an owner because you're writing purchase orders, right? So I'm like, you get the crown king on who gets to be the GC. So you get to make somebody's day, but then you have to go break a few hearts at the same time. So you got to stay humble. And the only reason why I'd ever fire you isn't because of a mistake. It's because you were treating people poorly, right? And to this day, even with us now, like the big thing is we're like, you don't go run around stomping on people, because it goes back to the message that you were saying when we're driving. I mean, I don't honk at people because I make just as many mistakes on the road as anybody else. So I have no room to honk, you know?
Which goes back to be fair and reasonable.
There it is.
Right? Be fair and reasonable.
So your greatest joy so far, like out of all the things you've got to do, going from, I started with trying to become a concrete expert, now you're a data center expert. Between that gap, what's been the greatest joy that you've had in your career so far? Do you enjoy building what you're doing now versus something else that you built in the past, like hospitals or national labs?
I would say that firehouse project I did in Pleasanton for the city of Pleasanton was but there was a couple factors.
Were you test driving the pole from the second story down, riding it out?
We might have done that. But it was two factors. It was a pivotal point in my development of what does it mean to be like fair and reasonable. And that came from Randy Stewart. And, just data, be pragmatic, like what's fair, and like and also come up with solutions. Don't just say, well, no, this is the way that, but come up with like, how do you be a part of that team to come up with solutions? But then also working on a project that affected a community directly, being this, performing arts center that kids get to go off and, do theater and
change their lives.
Yeah, it could change their lives. And so kind of being something that's a bit of a, like that to me was probably, as I step back and look at it, I'm like, I had a lot of fun on that job. I had a great mentor on that project. Very challenging. It was a hard bid job. All the other things that today I'm like, oh, that just sounds miserable to have to like fight out every change order. Because they're trying to get back every dollar that they left on the table when they hard bid it, kind of thing. And so, but it teaches a lot about adversity and how do you navigate through it and how do you, I remember on that project getting a phone call and the president of the general contractor yelling at me, and I remember just calmly just saying, hey, whenever you're ready to talk like an adult, you just give me a call back, but I'm going to hang up now. And he starts losing it. Like, you're not going to hang up on me. And I'm just like, whenever you're ready, I'm more than happy to have this conversation with you, but I'm not.
A lot of emotion in these construction projects.
Yeah. And I'm just like, just give me a call back. But and don't get me wrong, I was inside, I was like all kinds of heated, but just, to have those experiences and to respond well. And, sometimes I don't respond well and trying to do my best to respond well. But that project was, just epic. But it was good I would say that as I look back, it was what I needed at the time. And the same way Lawrence Livermore is what I needed at the time for my family. At that point, it was what I needed for my career and my development as an individual and to be fair and reasonable. And as I look now, like I can look back and it's not that necessarily one is significantly better. I've obviously had jobs I didn't enjoy and I moved on from those jobs, but I would say now that the challenge and the opportunity that's been provided to me here at Vantage has been like, it's been epic.
Well, you guys are exploding, right? So there's only a couple more things I wanted to cover and then we'll bring it on home. But I guess the first of those two would be knowing what you know now. What do you see the greatest challenges in the next 3 years, and how do you see the industry shaping or evolving? And what do you see? Like I said this on a podcast with Rich Miller at Data Center Frontier, where I'm like, the thing that I think is the biggest difference from like when I started was I see that the ecosystem, like the group of partners, they have an impact of picking winners, right? I think that the supply chain has the ability to pick who wins some of these big programs, because, it could be Vantage and two other major players like you guys competing over the same major program in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
But that manufacturer only has the ability to provide enough components or technology for one of you, right? So whoever gets their equipment kind of wins those deals sometimes. And I'm saying the tail kind of wags the dog a little bit. So I'm not sure. Do you agree with that right now? Or
yes and no. I don't know if I'd call it necessarily the Pacific Northwest. I'd just probably.
Oh, it was arbitrary. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm not saying, I wouldn't call it a specific region.
Oh, okay.
I would say it's globally.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I think that it's not necessarily, there's the scale of the deals and the projects that are going on right now Like no one 4 years ago
Would have predicted this.
would have predicted how big they are today.
Or how much bigger they'll get, right? Because now we have all these other emerging technologies.
Yeah, or how much bigger they're going to get. And so,
Remember when 6 megawatts was a big project?
yeah, I remember when 3 megawatts was a big. I mean, and so now like with 6 megawatts, not a big deal. And so what I would say is that I think it's a bit of being who can also be the most agile in that, and how do they set up their supply chain in a way to be agile. So that's why I mean by is that we've become like as much as I think the pandemic really pushed us to better understand how global we really are, and that something that happens in China or Germany right now with gas, right, directly affects all of us.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so I would say that it kind of goes back to it is a bit of that's where I would agree with you. It is a bit of the tail wagging the dog in the context of the suppliers of who's going to get it or who isn't going to get it, which kind of goes back to what you and I are talking about, on the ride over here, which was like treat people the same and treat them well, no matter if you have the upper hand or they have the upper hand, because you just don't like, it's just the right thing to do. And then I can easily go back and say, like, they're never going to have any animosity against you because you continue to treat them well and fair, which really means fair and reasonable, which doesn't mean that you just get run over, right? And so it goes to this whole vendor, contractor relationships, like all of that, because like I understand, my teams understand, we can't do what we need to do for our customers without our vendors. And I mean that from general contractors, third-party project managers, you name it. Like we can't do it without them. And so back when things were slower, did you treat them well? Did you treat them fair and reasonable? Right now, the expectation, the hope is that it's going to be the same, or they're going to they're going to want to work with you because they know they're going to have a higher chance of being successful working with you than they are with your competitor. And so
I agree. What I think I've seen too is there were people that took positions with their suppliers and vendors that were like, look, this is it. And if you don't like it, there's 10 more companies lined up to be able to have the same opportunity. But in certain markets, there's not, right? There's one or two. And all the rest are like, look, there's so much pent up demand that tell me why I should put 200 of my electricians on your program instead of theirs, right? And that's what I'm saying. I'm like, it used to be where there was always tons of people standing in line that are ready to take it in the teeth because they just want to get in the game. And now people are, I mean, the people that are sitting in your chair are fairly sophisticated and armed to the teeth with everything that you know that you want. It's your product and you know exactly what you want to build. There's people downstream of that are almost like, so do we, right? And we have control of the labor arbitrarily, or, we have access to all the busway. There's a lot of bottlenecking. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I completely agree. I would also say that one of the other aspects of it is that the other thing I think that it's important for us to remember is that there are also things that are internal constraints for owners.
Like?
Well, call it 3 years ago, we wanted to build more, or we wanted to go do a job, but the lease fell through. And so then we couldn't do the job. And so now it feels like that people have been strung along.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And so there's constraints, but it's like, well, if I don't have a job, I don't have a job, and it has nothing to do with you or the performance you've done, but I don't have a job. And so it's kind of the sins of our forefathers, or even things that are outside of our control. That call wasn't fair, but it's what it is. And so how do you navigate that, and how do you work through that? And so, I think that's the other piece of this, which is how do you work through where now it's like, oh my gosh, we need everybody you possibly can, which I think just kind of further plays into the aspect of, be fair and reasonable. I mean, I've heard stories of my competitors dragging two general contractors along, telling them they're both going to get the job, and then they ended up not getting the lease from the customer, and now neither of them got it.
And neither will bid on their work again, probably.
And it's just like, I'm like, that just sounds where it's like, we pick the horse that put up the best team. Let's work with them. And they know if things work well within our leases and things work well with our projects, they're going to have the job, right? Which at least now they're not now competing, because then what would happen is let's say that other company ended up getting the lease and they have two And it's like, okay, well, there's a real job. Now give me your true best and final to find out who's actually going to get the project. And it's like you just drug them through this 6-month process or who knows whatever it is. And now you're going to your point, kick them in the teeth one last time to squeeze out every extra penny. And it's like, so you're going to get that on the front end, but that doesn't necessarily mean best value and or best cost in the back end and or your next project, or especially in a market today, which is like, yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to want to bid that job.
That's it.
In the future.
There's no predictability, right? So
That's right.
If you're on the platform side, what you want is transparency and predictability. Like, can I rely on that group? And by the way, I'm doing all my financial numbers. I was waiting for you to say like the hardest part about my job is the investment committees, or, because those could be a bloodbath too, right? But when you keep slewing through a whole bunch of different groups and partners, then maybe sometimes you built models that you were going to do based on how much it costs to deliver that product based on this team, but now you have to use a different one. The times are changing, right? We see a lot of supply chain impact on cost.
Yeah, inflation. I mean, I would say right now it's trying to educate the business as much as we possibly can on the realities of equipment being delayed, of
door hardware could take 12 weeks.
Which you ordered well in advance. It has nothing to do about what you ordered. You ordered it well in advance, and yet now you're finding out it's delayed. And so it's like, how do you help mitigate that risk, and how do you communicate that to the business? And we're really, really pushing through uncharted territory. And the reality is, it's not just us; it's also our suppliers are also facing these uncharted territories where, you name it. Hey, who had ever thought that gas and natural gas flowing to Germany would have happened a year ago? Like, we wouldn't have ever thought that.
Sure.
And so to me, it's there was this book called The CEO Test that I read. And one of the biggest things that I took away from that book is it talks about the people who are going to be successful are the people who can work through ambiguity. And like, how do you navigate that ambiguity? And I think that is probably the most difficult part of my job is I've got a group of construction people who want to go build and deliver and they want predictability, right? Yeah. They want, because that's what they live and breathe. And that's kind of what they hang their shingle on, is predictability. I'm going to provide this project on this time. I'm going to provide this cost, and I'm going to provide this predictability. But yet we live in a world, and especially in the developer world, the data center, wholesale provider world of, we're working to get the project, we're working to get the lease. We obviously have all these other, there's only so much equipment, whatever it may be. And it's like trying to balance all of that, and things happen. It's all this ambiguity of, is this job going to go, or is this job going to go, or is that job going to go, or are all of them going to go?
Yeah. I remember those days vividly. And you have multiple campuses in North America. So you're dealing with that same problem at a macro scale, right? And I remember, like, I had this conversation last week at Data Center World. I presented on, the purpose, what we do is we provide a lot of purpose to veterans that are transitioning. And it's because they have a really team mindset, right? Or the mission, or the command comes first. And it's a selfless way of approaching things. And I think the military does a really good job of helping create those people. You've had a couple of Ovita candidates of ours. You have one of our Ovita graduates on one of your programs right now, and she's fantastic. She came from, the Coast Guard, and we have people from every branch of service. And I remember at Data Center World, one of the things I talked about is, like, I have a background. I'm a Navy submariner person, so that, there's a lot of former submariners or Navy nukes or whatever in this space, a lot of parapros from the Air Force. And someone was asking me a question, and I said, what I have learned is the greatest people that have been I paint with a broad stroke here, so I'm trying to be careful, right? But I said, if I were to go back now knowing what I've learned over having hired so many different people from every branch of service, and I think that I did what a lot of other people did, which was, I was like, yeah, I could read their resumes. I knew what a Navy nuke was, or I knew what a Air Force Power Pro was. I have learned that the best PMs I've had so far have been non-technical in the military. Look at my two business partners on the Overwatch side, right? They're two infantrymen. And I would hire more infantry before I'd hire more Navy nukes. And people are like, why? Because we come from a technical background, so we could analyze. If I could figure out primary and secondary nuclear propulsion, I could understand a distributed redundant, the reality is they are just so used to they are comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And that's that whole part about, thriving through ambiguity, I guess. But they're just so used to being in combat or something to where something bad happens. Jesse always uses Mike Tyson's favorite phrase, like everyone had a plan until you get punched in the face. But that was every deployment, right? And you're talking about a guy that's been in hundreds of ticks or, firefights. And I've learned that those people from the infantry that have been, their definition of mission critical was not measured in downtime. It was mortality. And when you deal with them, they just thrive in a high pressure environment. Like guys like Jesse and Anthony just kind of, they actually get better when the pressure's higher. And what they do is they learn how to always battle through and just plow through those challenges and those setbacks. And then having them, and we have a guy that runs our field team, and he's exceptional. He was one of Jesse's mentors, and he has the perfect mindset for running a team, right? That's why we one day I'm like, you are only in charge of the humans now, because he has such an amazing way of engaging them and saying, listen, I understand that you're not comfortable. That's okay. That's actually good. Let me help you get more comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So we're not going to change the pressure that's around you, but we could change the way that we respond to those things. And he really focuses on coaching his people to do that. And I'm like, look, I don't do that nearly like as effectively as this guy can. Everybody has a skill set. He was gifted with that ability to communicate in a way to where, you were talking about, you kind of have to change the way you engage with people at whatever their altitude and airspeed is, right? Not yours.
That's right.
So I'm learning that I would have probably not traditionally hired a lot of infantry people, right? But now I realize they measure crisis different. They respond to pressure different. And they just are so used to battling through these challenges that they don't stop, throw their sucker in the dirt, take their ball, go home. They're like, what are you talking about? We got to get through this. We're taking that hill still. You get it?
Yeah.
And you can't teach that mindset. You're not going to learn that in college as much. You're going to learn that in the field.
Yeah, completely agree. It's like I don't try to at all equate, a battlefield versus, but it was kind of not much different in the context of the lessons learned, in the sense that if we didn't do this project with my dad, we didn't get this project done, there was no paycheck.
No food.
There was no food.
Yeah.
Right. And that was not lost upon us.
Yeah.
And so it was, it's cold outside. It's whatever it is. And again, I completely say it's obviously life versus being cold, completely different things. And get that, but it does build that same context of perseverance of you got to push through, you got to figure it out.
That's the endurance, the perseverance part that you're talking about. Right. I think that it's always interesting talking to people. I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of really smart folks. So understanding how they codify that, right? But I think that what I'm learning is that trend is whatever we call it or however we label it, it's all falling in the same bucket, right? We're all looking for the same thing, which is someone that we could rely on, someone we could trust.
That's right.
So any other big changes that you see in this space that you have that you're trying to kind of get around the corner on, trying to look around the corner on?
We talked a bit about how do you get in front of equipment and stuff, which I think if you're having that discussion now, you're probably too late.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's much value add in that.
Someone told me that if you hadn't ordered your engines in January, that you won't get any in 2023 or something like that. It could be that bad. And I'm like, all right, well, that's aggressive.
Yeah, it's nuts. I think it still goes back to the being agile and, and thinking about that even in the context of your designs or your buildings. Because who knows what's going to happen with computing.
True.
As you think about the designs of your buildings, can you in 5-10 years, whatever it is, which, I was talking to a buddy of mine that I worked with at the lab that is working in the autonomous vehicle space. Sure. And he's like, we're closer than people think we are.
Interesting.
And he's in the midst of it. And so when you think about that, it's just kind of like, holy cow, that's nuts. And if, and he's not saying that we're there next year, but he's saying 5 years probably, is kind of where he's sitting. He sees it could happen. Now, I obviously don't live in the computing world. I build the buildings that it sits in.
Sure.
But who knows where they're going to be at in 5? And so how does that affect our buildings and our ability to cool and power and, do our buildings get smaller? Do they, who knows? Do they become more dense?
So take a look at that technology and
Yeah.
then layer it on top of AI and AR and VR and drones or whoever else. And who knows, you know?
Yeah. And so I think that goes back to the being agile, right? How do you, and the other piece is even in the context of how do you persevere and how do you don't pick up your ball? Well, that's one, like you got to keep people in the game, but then you also help them think out of the box. How else can we solve this? How else can we figure this out? And that's the other piece, which is like getting people to say, don't just be like, okay, well, let's just keep on brute forcing it. Like, Jocko Willett talks about it in his book, and they do a training where they're in an apartment building or whatever, and there's a guy with a big machine gun at the end, and every time somebody comes around the corner, they're done. And so it's like, and how many teams just keep on, well, just throw more guys down the corridor. They can't take them all. And it was finally somebody realized, well, let's go outside the building, go around and take that guy out, and then you can get where you need to go. And I think that's the other thing that, we want to try to be encouraging people, which goes out of kind of something we were talking about earlier, which is like, my objective is over there right now. As I'm looking at it, I have a waterfall. Well, I don't want to go down the waterfall. How else can I still get there? Versus just keep on sending people down that hallway, like that Jocko talks about.
You got to have people that are creative.
And so I think that it's as leaders in the industry is encouraging our people and giving our people the latitude to get creative and think around it. Ask the dumb questions, if you will, the prodding questions, the get people thinking questions. I think that's becoming more and more important, especially with the crunch. Like, how else do you still deliver? Or how, equipment's going to be like, how else do you sequence the work? Think out, like figure it out. Like, we got to figure it out.
Or find new products. There's all kinds of things that we had to find,
find new products. I mean, it's not just giving up and saying, well, I called the one person. So I think there's that perseverance of saying, well, no, it's not just continuing to try to, like, if you keep on sending people down that hallway, there's going to keep on getting killed. That's not the right call.
I hear you.
And so I think that's the other piece of which is how do we get people to have that perseverance, but to have the perseverance to think differently to still solve that problem versus having a lot of casualties. And in our world, talk about it as you're sending more time down that hallway, you're sending more money down that hallway or whatever it is, and you just keep on throwing money down that hallway. You just keep on throwing money down that hallway. It's like, well, how do I get my teams? How do we get people to think differently than what we've done in the past? Because to your point, I love experienced people, especially in the data center world. But the worst thing the thing I least like is when somebody says, well, this is how we've always done it.
Oh, sure. The baggage that comes with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that to me is just the worst thing I can ever hear, especially today, right? With all the challenges that we're facing right now, that is like one of the worst things I could hear. Now, if it follows up with, hey, this is the way we've always done it, but hey, how about we try this? I'd love it, right? All day long. But that to me, I think is probably like how we have to like navigate and kind of figure out how we're going. Because the next challenge is, I think, going to be the computing piece. If it's in 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, if things getting smaller, faster, what does it then look like for the data center world?
Well, listen, we'll wrap it up. I guess my final question, like I said, I only had those two, but I kind of broke those questions into a couple of different pieces. But so what's next? I mean, like, you're reading books about, the CEO this or something. I mean, like, did you have ambition to go do something bigger, or is you just enjoying what you're doing and watching it grow and scale? Or
yeah, I've probably been a bit more of a person that I try to keep my head down, and then people say, hey, I like what they're doing. I like what Sam's doing. Let me keep on. Like, let's see how else we can grow and expand that. So I would say generally, I usually got, earlier jobs, I get bored easily. I'm definitely not bored.
Well, it sounds like you've also went, director, senior director, VP, SVP. So you've had a lot of opportunities to continue to grow into those challenges as you continue to evolve and move up, right? Plus, the beauty about this space is the soup's never done cooking, right?
Right. So
you're going to constantly, just as soon as you figured out how to master that, then the whole dynamic changes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so, for me, it's, let's put a title to the side. Like, I had the opportunity to and privileged to lead our equipment procurement team for 2 years. And that's now been recently rolled over into a global function, which is great. It was the best thing for our business to do. And so like having kind of that, and I still have a close connection with that team, and still have to do one-on-ones because they're obviously a critical portion of what we do to deliver for our customers. But who knows what other groups or opportunities where, like, I didn't necessarily, I understood what it meant to buy equipment, but not to the degree that this team is doing it and to the scale that they're doing it, which is just epic, right? And so getting to kind of dive into that has been a lot of fun. And my title, when I took that group on, my title didn't change. It was more of like, hey, take on this group. So, hopefully there's some more opportunities like that within Vantage that'll kind of.
When you started, how many people did it have?
There was, I think I was told I was number 67.
And how many do they have now?
I think 600 or 700.
Wow. That's a lot. So 10x growth in less than 4 years. That's pretty explosive.
Yeah.
Well, listen, man, is there anything that you'd like to leave as a final thought or a message for anybody that's listening? Any advice to anybody that's just got in the space and has a bunch of certifications in concrete, or like, is there, you said something earlier, which will probably end up becoming like the title of this one, but you're like, don't let the circumstances that you're in right now determine what you're capable of. It was something like that. I'll go back and listen to it, I'm sure, when they're done producing it. But what would be your advice?
I think my biggest advice, and it's because it's formed me the most, which is like, don't forget you're working with people.
Ooh, I like that.
Like, no matter if you're in data centers, no matter if you're at a restaurant and you got a server that's serving you, or if you're in the street, like, don't forget you're working with people.
Maybe that should be the theme.
It is by far, and I say that because in my personal life, I've had people, and still we have those relationships with people that, like, as I mentioned, I have my list of everybody, like, of the main people who've kind of affected my life and who have contributed to my life, and it's like they had empathy. And
patience.
Patience. And, and I think that fail at it, but I want to continue to do well. And so as I step back and look at it, I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to get to where I'm at, is because I remember I'm working with people, having empathy, and learning as much as I possibly can kind of through this thing. And so I would say for anybody, like, my advice would be, don't forget you're working with people.
That's awesome advice, man. Well, listen, thanks for coming out to Austin. I'm looking forward to hanging out with you after the show, and I think we have some fun stuff planned that before we send you back to Denver, we'll sit down and plot out some more data center domination. But this has been awesome. So this is exactly what I was hoping to get out of it. So now you understand why I didn't prep you or send you anything.
It's been great.
And I'm excited for other people in the industry to get it, because I think that hopefully there'll be somebody that has something of value that they can introduce to you, and they just don't know how.
Yeah.
Maybe now someone will, and now they'll be able to benefit both of you, right? And your customers as well, as a byproduct of that. So to that end, thanks for being here, Sam. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you.
Awesome.